Hey and welcome back. So in this video, let's build this beautiful full stack app that you see on the screen. I'll show you how that works in a second, but first let's talk about the tech stack behind it and what you will learn from this video. So for the backend, we will use Python with a framework called Flask, which will help us to build our REST API. And for the front end, we will use React with a UI library to speed up the design process. And at the end, we will get this beautiful design in minutes. Now you can learn how to build a full stack app with React and Python without watching this video, but that might take you days to figure out everything and explore the best practices. But if you watch this video, you can learn everything in just 2 hours, because I'll share everything I learned from my research, so you don't really have to spend as much time as I did. And I'll even show you how to deploy this application live on the internet for free, so that you can put it on your resume and maybe share it with your friends. And by understanding this deployment process, you will be able to deploy all of your Python projects in the same way. So I think this is one of the best projects to get started with Python development. And the best part is, it doesn't really matter if you are on Windows, macOS or Linux. I'll show you all commands you need for each specific operating system and get through this course. We will also cover best practices such as why you should create virtual environments for your Python apps, how to separate your data model and routes, and a bunch of other things. And since this is the very first Python tutorial on the channel, I will keep it simple and make this course as beginner friendly as possible by explaining every detail that you would need. Now with that being said, let me just showcase the application. So this is the application that we'll have at the end of the day, and we're going to deploy it as well. You can think of it like a friend store where you can create one card for each of them. Let's go ahead and try to add a friend. I'll just put something random for now, for the role and for the description as well. And let's just give it a name. A gender. It's going to be male. Let's add it. And there we go. It has been created in our database. And it just got a randomly generated profile image. And if I want to, I can update it. So here I'll say my description. And once I click this update button, it's going to update here. And there we go. And if I want to, I can delete that, and it is going to be responsive as well. Let's go ahead and test it out. So here we are on the larger screens, in the tablets and in the phone, and it's going to have a light and dark mode switch implemented. And if we delete all of our friends, let's see what's going to happen. There we go, it just says you don't have any friends. So that was the application showcase. I publish these videos for free. I just appreciate your sub and thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and let's get started. Okay, so I have created this React Python tutorial on my desktop, and then I just open it up in VS Code. Now we need 2 different folders. One, we are going to store our backend, and the other one is going to be the front end, which will have our React application into it. And this is something that we'll do later. For now, let's focus on the backend. So here, I'll just create a file called app.py. And before we jump into the more complex stuff, let's just take a look at the Python syntax a little bit, maybe for a couple of minutes. So here, I'll just say print hello world. Let's go with classic one. And here, I'll just open up my terminal and I'll say cd into the backend folder, and then we'll just say Python, and we'll say app.py, which is going to allow us to run this file. And if you're on macOS or Linux, that's going to be Python 3 and Python for Windows. And to be able to run this, first you need to install Python on your machine, which is something that I'll assume you already have done, and it is pretty simple to do so. Just visit the Python website and install it, and you should be fine to go. So after that, let's just press enter, and we can see this hello world has been printed out in our terminal. And let's see how we can create functions, how we can write a for loop and just have if-else statements. So here I'll just delete this line first, and I'll say def my function, which is going to take this name argument. And here you put colon to be able to get this indented level, and you have to have indents in Python, and it is really important to have the correct indentation level. And here basically we just defined a function. So I'll say if name is equal to, let's say John, then we'll just say print John has entered the building. And in the else case, I'll just duplicate this one, but I'll say it is not John, but it is, let's say it is, just put it like that and print the name. And let's just write a for loop. I'll say for I in range 5, it is gonna run 5 times, starting from 0 up until 5, just like other programming languages. So we'll say I, and we're gonna say maybe seconds have passed. And let's go ahead and call this function. I'll say my func with the John being the name. So if we just run that, we should be able to hit the if check that says John has entered the building and 5 seconds passed. There we can see. So it starts from 0 up until 4 because 5 is not included. And if we put Jane, so it should hit the else check where we can see it is not John, but it is Jane. And then again the for loop. So this is the really basics, but we're gonna do more than that when we build our REST API. And there is just one more thing that I want to mention. So here I'll just create another file called, let's say, db.py, and I'll say print, maybe this is my db file, and let's create a db variable. I'll just say maybe 25, I don't know, and then we'll just say print my db size is 25 gigabytes, just like that. So here let's save, and we're gonna go into the app.py, and I'll just say print this is my app.py file. And now we can import other variables from other modules. So here we have this db.py module or file. I can say from db import db, right? This is the variable that we had. So if I just save this and run the app.py, what is going to happen? It is going to import the db, but it is also going to run this entire file. And we're going to see this first print in the terminal, and then the second one, and then once this has been completed, it is going to run this print. Let's just see if this is the case. I'll say python app.py. Here you cannot really see it, it is at the very bottom, okay? But just know that I'll just run this file, and I can see this is my db file because we just imported that, and it's going to execute this first line, then this one, and then this one. Here we can see this is the db size, and then it is going to run this print. So this is something you need to keep in mind. When you import something, it is going to first execute that file. And this is important because we're gonna use this in a couple of minutes when we build our REST API. So we're gonna say if underscore underscore name underscore underscore is equal to, again, underscore underscore main underscore underscore, then we'll just say print this file is executed directly, or maybe let's say called directly. And I'll just take this, put it into this db.py. Okay, I'll just delete this actually, just to keep it simple. And here I will say print this is my app.py file. Now what is going to happen is that we're going to import that, so it is going to execute this file, but since we didn't run the db.py, it is not going to hit this if check. So I know that sounds a little bit confusing, but let me just show that. If I just say run the app.py, okay, so it is going to run. Oops, there is an issue, but we're going to get that because we don't have db. So I'll just say db, I'll just say 10. Okay, I'll clear up my console and just run this again. So here I'm gonna run this file. We're just gonna import the db. It is gonna run this print, create the variable, and it is not gonna hit this if check. And then it is going to run this print. So this is the order that we'll have. There we go. This is my db file that I can see. It run this one and run this one, but it wasn't able to run this print because name is not equal to main. So it just skipped that and run this. This is my app.py file. Here we can see. But if I were to say python db.py, it should be able to hit this if check because we are running this directly. And at that point, this name is going to be equal to main. So if I just run that, I can see this is my DB file, and this file is called directly because this is going to evaluate to true. Now this is something to keep in mind because we will use this in a couple of minutes and it's gonna make a lot of sense once we get there. Okay, so I'll delete this everything in this file and shrink my terminal maybe, then delete everything in this file, and we're gonna create another one, let's say models.py, which we're gonna store our database schema in this models.py file. Now we can go ahead and install our packages that we'll use directly, but in Python development, it is common to create a virtual environment so that we could manage our dependencies completely isolated from our machine. And it is known as a best practice in Python development. So here I'll just open up my terminal, and in Windows you would say Python -m venv. This is the, I believe, the module that comes with Python, and the other one is going to be the virtual environment name that you would like to give. So that could be anything really, but the convention is, I think, to use the venv so that you know it is a virtual environment. And in macOS and Linux, that should be Python 3. So I'll just go ahead and run this. That should create under the backend a virtual environment for us. So it's gonna have its own interpreter and every other scripts that it needs. So let's just wait for that a little bit, and then we're gonna activate that virtual environment. So there we go, now it's been activated. We'll just say venv /scripts/ there should be an activate script that we could run. So that's gonna activate the virtual environment for us. So I'll just run that, and here we can see this green venv, which just makes sure that this has been activated. So just to quickly reiterate, in this command, the first venv refers to the Python module, which is used to create virtual environments. And the second venv is the name you are giving to the directory where the virtual environment will be created. And here we can see this is the name that we have given. Now we need a couple of different dependencies. So first I'll clear up my console with CLS, and we're going to install all of them one by one. And for that, we're going to use Python package manager, which is going to be pip. And if you are again on macOS or in Linux, that should be pip3, but pip is going to be for Windows. And I think with the Python 3.4 and above, it is coming by default. But if you have this Python version just like me that is not 3.4, I think you need to install it manually, which is pretty simple. Just take a look at some videos on YouTube. That should be about 5 minutes to do so. Okay, I'll clear up my console and install my packages or dependencies. So I'll say pip install, and we're going to use Flask to be able to create that REST API, and then we'll say Flask -SQLAlchemy, and then we will install Flask course to be able to get rid of the course errors. And this SQLAlchemy is going to be our ORM, which stands for Object Relational Mapping. So you could think of it like a Python toolkit that allows us to access and manage SQL databases using Pythonic code. So instead of writing those raw, let's say, SQL code where we just say select all from users and putting some queries here, instead of doing that, we will just use Python code to be able to interact with our database, which is pretty convenient. Once you have all these packages, let's press enter to be able to install all of them. And again, it is going to install all of them in your virtual environment and not directly into your machine, which is pretty cool. And I think it should be completed in a second. So there we go, all of them has been installed. Let's save this file and kill them, where we are going to go into the app.py file, which is going to be the entry point for our application. So here, let's import our packages. So we'll say from the Flask package, let's import the Flask. And this is the name that you would give. So I'll just do a quick comparison to the JavaScript, where you would say import, let's say express from express, where you put the package name later and then the default export name. So that could be anything. And here it is just vice versa. First you run this part, which is going to be the package name, and then you import your stuff. So after this, we'll say from Flask underscore SQLAlchemy, we're going to import SQLAlchemy just like that. And we'll say from Flask course import course. And if you don't know what course is, I'll explain in a couple of minutes. Let's create our app. So we'll just say app is going to be equal to Flask, and it wants you to pass this argument where we'll just say underscore underscore name and underscore underscore. So this is something that Flask wants you to pass so that it can do things that it wants to do in a better way. That's going to be important for relative paths that it needs, etc. So this is just a configuration that you need to pass. Then let's initialize this course into our app, which again I'll explain in a couple of minutes. And let's add a couple of different configurations. So I'll just go ahead and say app.config, and we're gonna get this square brackets, and I'll just say SQLAlchemy, and I think I'll just go with uppercase for all of them. So SQLAlchemy underscore database underscore URI, and for the database we'll be using SQLite, which is gonna be the file-based database that we could use. It is going to create it locally under this backend folder. So I'll just say SQLite and colon 3 slashes and then the database name. So you could put anything here that is gonna end with DB, and I will call it as friends because this is what we are storing in our application. And another config that we'd like to have, let's say app.config. So this is going to be for performance reasons, and here you could put single quotes or double quotes. I'll just be using them interchangeably. So here I'll say SQL again alchemy underscore track modifications, and I'll just assign that to be false. So here you don't really put that with the lowercase, but that should be capitalized for false and true. So here we're going to make that to be false so that we don't really consume resources, and we don't really need it because we don't really care about the modifications that SQLAlchemy does. So this is something that you want to assign it to be false even in the production, unless you don't have a specific reason. And we're going to create our DB instance where we'll just call SQLAlchemy and then just pass our app into it. So we have our DB, we have our configuration, we have configured the course, as well as created our app with our imports. And let's go ahead and run our application. So I'll say app.run, and we will say debug is going to be equal to true so that we could have a better debugging in our console. Now we don't really want to run this because what's going to happen if you just from app you import app? So as I talked about it before, it is gonna run this entire file and it is gonna run this app multiple times. But instead we would like to wrap it with that if check. So we'll say if we are running this file directly, so underscore underscore name is equal to underscore underscore main underscore underscore, then just go ahead and run this app.run function, right? So this is something really to keep in mind, and I hope I did a good job explaining this if statement. So whenever you import something from this app, it is not going to hit this if check because this is not going to evaluate to true unless you run this, let's say python app.py. Only then it is going to hit this if check, and I've explained that a couple of minutes ago. And the other thing that we'd like to add is going to be our models. And by the way, let's delete this file content for now. And in this case, a model is going to be just a table in our database. So here I'll first import from app import db. Okay, so we're gonna access to this db variable that we have created, and we're gonna create a class called friend, which is gonna take db.model as the first argument. And each friend will have a couple of different fields such as ID, name, it's gonna have a role, the description, and let's say gender they're gonna have, and lastly they're gonna have the image URL. So let's go ahead and create all of them one by one. So ID is going to be equal to db.column, and the type we're going to pass is going to be integer, and this is going to be the primary key so that it's going to be unique and it's going to be incremented by 1 automatically, and we could index it with this primary key. So we'll say name is going to be equal to, again, db.column, type will be db.string, and the maximum length is going to be 100, and we'll say this is going to be nullable, false. So this can't really be null, and each user should have a name. I will duplicate this to have the role as well. And for the maximum size, we could go with maybe 50. And for the description, let's go with not db.string, and let's just put db.text. And I think it's gonna allow us to have a little bit more length in the type, in terms of length, right? So I'll call it to be description, and I will just duplicate this again. We're gonna have the gender as well as the image URL. So this is gonna be it, where we'll just say we have db.string, and let's say the maximum length can be 10. And here for the image URL, so here in Python, by the way, you use this snake case. So if you have a variable, let's say my long called variable, you just put those underscores, and this is called as snake case, and that's what we have just done. So we're gonna say db.string again. Maybe I'll just copy this, and for the length, let's see, we're gonna go with maybe 200 because that's gonna be URL, so it could be a bit longer than that. Now we could say the image URL could be null, so we'll just say nullable, that's going to be true. So they should have a gender, a description, role, and name. And if you want to make some of those fields optional, you could just say nullable is going to be true, but in my case I just want to pass all of them, and they're going to be mandatory to pass. And now we can create one function for our convenience. So I'll say def to underscore JSON, which is something really common to do in this kind of models that you create. So when you send data to client, you want to send it in the type of JSON, and this is something that you need to keep in mind. So instead of doing this multiple times, we're going to just create it once, and whenever we want to convert that to JSON, we're going to call this function, and self here is going to be the friend, the specific friend that we are calling this method with. So later that's going to be a little bit more clear, but for now just know that we are taking the friend and converting to a JSON field so that we could return it to the client. So I'll say return and just put an object where we're going to have this ID, that's going to be self.id, and we're going to have the name, self.name. So we're going to have role, self.role, same for the description, gender, and image URL. Let me just go ahead and update all of them. And now in the image URL, instead of passing it like that, we're going to do it actually image URL, just going to be the camel case, and we'll say self image underscore URL. So in JavaScript, which is going to be in our client, it is really common to have this camel case usage, and in Python it is going to be snake case. So this is what we store in our database and in our Python code, and this is what we're going to send to the client. So that's, we just rename it to be this image URL camel case. So with that, that's going to be it for this file, and we're going to be using this friend later when we interact with the database. And we're going to use this function again to be able to send this Python dictionary in the form of JSON. And this is what client wants us to pass. And the very last thing that we need, I think, instead of db, I created this wrong. That should be routes.py. So we're gonna put all of our routes, which are gonna be to create a friend, get all friends, delete them, and just update one friend. And let's go ahead first get our packages. So I'll say from app, we'll click to import the app as well as the db, and then we'll say from Flask, let's import the request and JSONify. Again, we'll use this when we send something to the client. We'll say from models, just import the friend class that we have created. And let's start with the most basic route, which is going to be get. all friends. And to be able to create a route, you would create a decorator. So I'll say add app.route, and you would put the name of the route. So here I'd like to just have /API/friends. And once we hit that with our, let's say, methods, which is gonna be get. If we hit this with the get method, then we're gonna call this function. I'll say get friends, where I'll just say friend.query.all, and this is gonna return us friends. So all friends that we have in our database. And there we go. Now we are using Python code to be able to interact with our database. And we didn't say something like select all from friends, right? We just said query all of them under this friend table. And now these friends are going to be in the format of Python objects, and we need to convert that to JSON and then send it to the client. So here we'll just say result, and now we need to loop through these friends because it is a list. So I'll say for friend in friends. That's how you can loop through a list in Python, and I'll just give a little bit space, and I'll say friend for each of them, just convert them to the JSON with that method that we have created, and then just put all of them into this list. Now let's say you had 3 different users or 3 different friends in the database, so you just put them into this JSON object. So let's say this is the first user information, and then the second one, and then the third one, and this is what we are storing in the result variable. And then I'll just say return JSONify this result, and as the status code we're gonna just send 200, and if we don't put anything, that's gonna be 200 by default. Let's save this file and then import it into our app.py. And we need to import it is because we are gonna be running this file. It is gonna be our entry point, and it doesn't have any idea that we have this routes.py file, right? You can't really see, we didn't use anything here. So after this db, I'll just go ahead and I'll just say import the routes. And since we are not returning anything from this file, we don't need to say from something, then import the routes. So we're just gonna run this so that we could actually execute this file when we run. Let's go here. I'll just clear up my console. I'll say python app.py. So there you go. This is a development server that we are running on this port. And now it says in the production use VSGI server instead. And that's what we'll be doing when we try to deploy this application. Now to be able to test this, let's visit localhost, not 3000, but 5000 /API/friends. Now it says this requested URL was not found, and I think it's because we are running this with the help of virtual environment, and for that we need to just set up our variables. And for that I'll just clear up my console, and I think I'll just say set flask _ app is going to be equal to app.py, and if you're on again macOS or Linux, that's going to be export, but here I am on Windows, that's going to be set. So that's going to be our Flask app environment variable. And let's say one more, we'll have Flask environment, which is going to be equal to development. And once we have done this, we can just say Flask run, and it is going to run this app.py file because this is our Flask app that we have mounted. So here, if we just refresh this, let's see, what do we have? So I'll just scroll at the very top. So it says no such table called friend. Let's see. We actually have this one, and let's see. Oh, okay. So we didn't create our tables. So we have created these models, but we are not creating any table into that. And for that, we need to run a method. And for that, I think I'll just go under the routes. I'll say db dot create all. So this is going to create all tables that we need in our database. And just to add kind of like an optimization on top of it, we'll just say with app underscore context. So again, this is some kind of configuration that you need to pass so that like this SQLAlchemy can do its job in a optimized and in a better way. So it's gonna create some kind of context in the background, and we're gonna create our tables in our DB. Let's save. So that was the only thing that we were missing. I'll just clear up my console, or maybe just kill this terminal, say cls, and then run flask run command. And let's test it out. I'll just refresh this, and there we go. Now I don't have any friends, so I just got an empty array back from the API. And if you're wondering how do I get this kind of beautiful formatting, for that I'm using JSON Viewer Pro free extension, and you can get that for free from Google Extension Store. So here, let's go ahead and try to add another route so that we can create a friend in our database. So I'll just go here and I'll say create a friend. And now there is one kind of like an issue that I want to fix. So whenever we add something to our code, first we need to kill the terminal and then just restart it with this command. Instead of that, I want whenever I change something, it's gonna reload automatically. And for that, we could say flask run and just add this option -- reload. With that, now whenever you do some change in your code, so I'll just delete that and save it. So it's gonna restart it because we have passed this kind of like an option. And let's say create a friend where we'll have app.route and /API/friends. Our methods is only gonna be post so that we can send some body, so data body to our backend and create a friend in the database with that data. And I know that I still haven't explained this course, but I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. So I'll say def create underscore friend function. We're gonna run this whenever we hit that endpoint with this method. Now we could just write the code, but since we're going to be doing some manipulations, I would like to handle my errors gracefully. So for that, we're going to use try and except. So here I'll say data request.json, and what this does, it's going to take the request and convert to a JSON so that we could take a look at some fields into it. Now I'll just say name is going to be equal to data.get the name field, and I'm gonna have the role as well as the description. So I'll say role just like this, and I'll say rename this to be description. And we'd like to have the gender as well as the image URL. So I think I'll duplicate this one, call it as a gender, but for the image URL, we're gonna do something else. So instead of creating image URL from the client, we're gonna create it dynamically in the backend. And for that, we're going to be using an API. So this is going to be the free API that we'll be using to generate avatar placeholders. And here you can see it just looks really great, and they have for male as well as for female options that we could see. And whenever you call that API, so I'll just go ahead, copy it and paste it. Every time you refresh, it's going to give you a different random URL or placeholder image. And instead of that, we would like to just have one, and that's going to be unique. So for that, you can add a username, and let's just call it. So every time now I refresh, it is going to give me the same image because this is going to be created for Scott. If I just say John, I will always get this result back. So this is for boys, and if we try to get a girl image, there we go. Every time I refresh, it's going to give me the same image. So that's what we'll be using. I'll go ahead and copy the URL, and we're gonna get the gender, and we're gonna check for that. So I'll just say fetch avatar image based on gender, just like this. And I'll say if gender is equal to male, then we're gonna run this part, okay? And otherwise, we're gonna run elif. We'll just say gender is gonna be equal to female. We're gonna run this part, and if you don't have the code in mind, you can just say pass. So just pass this checks for now, and in the else case, we'll just do something else. So here I'll just go ahead and I'll say gender in this if check, where I'll just say image underscore URL is gonna be equal to, so here we'll have a dynamic value, so we could use f strings, so just like this, f and double quotes, where we'll just have this API, and we'll just change this with the name. So instead of John always, we're gonna put whatever the user sent to us, and then we'll do the same thing for female option. But the only thing, we're gonna make this to be girl and this is gonna be boy, so that we could get different images. And in the else case, we'll just say image URL is gonna be equal to none. So probably we were never gonna hit this else check, but it is a better option to always have this kind of like a fallback. Okay, so we got the name, the role description, and then the gender. Depending on that, we got an image URL, and we would like to now create a new friend object in our database. So I'll just go ahead and say new underscore friend is equal to, call the friend class constructor, and I'll just pass the name, and we'll say role is going to be equal to role field that we just got from the request. Same for the description, and we're going to pass the gender, and then the image underscore URL, just like this. And we need to say gender is going to be equal to gender as well. So let me just put this like that so that you could see the entire line. And now we have created that, and we need to add it to our database session. So we'll say db.session.add the new friend. So this is not going to immediately add to the database. First, we need to commit this. So think of it like a staging area when we have in Git, right? First, we say git add all. That's gonna add all of them to the staging area, and if you want to commit that, you'll say git commit -m in your commit message, then you would run that. So this is same kind of approach. We'll say db.session.commit and call the function. Now that we have saved the user to the database, we'll just say return JSONify. You could send a message that says user created successfully, but let's just say friend created successfully, and later I'm gonna change the result, so I'll say 201. Instead of this, basically I will return the new friend and I will call this toJSON method. But for now, let's add this message, and if there is anything goes wrong, we're gonna go after this try. They should be under the same indentation level, so I'll say except the exception. So let's say we're gonna get the exception, and to be able to reference that, we're gonna just rename it to be E. So we got the error that we had, or the exception. We will just say db.session roll back to the previous state because there is something unexpected just happened, and we'll say return JSONify. We could just say maybe error, and we'll say convert this error to be a string, and we'll say 500 status code. And by the way, 201 means some resource has been created, right? So just like that. And let's go ahead and test it out. So for that, we can't really send post requests, just like calling our endpoint like this /API /friends. This is going to be get request by default, and for that we can use kind of like a tool or a literal tool called Postman. So this is the desktop application that I have, and let's create a workspace. You can install it for free as well. I'll go with blank workspace, and I will call it as react-python tutorial, and it's going to be just for me, and let's create that. Now we can create a collection. Instead of that, instead of using this so to say desktop application, I'll go ahead and use it in VS Code. So if you want to do the same thing, just go ahead and install the Postman. It's gonna be this one, and you can use this client to be able to send requests. So here in my workspaces, I have React Python tutorial, and I will create a collection, and I think I'll call it as friends. Now I will create one request to be able to get all friends. So we already test this out, but I'll create that again. So I'll say get all, and our endpoint is going to be, let's say, http localhost 5000 /API/friends. So if we just run this, we're going to get an empty array because we don't have any friends. And let's duplicate this one, which is going to be a post method. So if you save that, it's going to update here as well. And let's say create friend, and we need to send the body in the format of JSON. So here, open up an object, we need to send the name field, let's say John, maybe say John Doe, and for the role we need to send, let's say software engineer, and then for the description I'll say he works at Google, and I think we also need to pass the gender, and he's gonna be a male, so let's put a comma here. And if we just send this now, we got an error. Let's see what is the case. So the server encountered, let's just see the console, what is going on. So here it just says create friend did not return a valid response. Let's check it out. So it might be this line. So we say return JSONify the message, and instead of this, let's just say new friend.toJSON. Let's see if this is gonna work or not. Once you have saved this, we can test it out again. Okay, it doesn't work for some reason. Let's take a look at the terminal again. So we have still same kind of error. So let's see what is going on in this file. So I just paused the video and take a look at the code, and I think I found the issue. So here we have indentation errors. So all of them indented under the else, but this is not really we would like to have. We just want to unindent one level, and we are gonna have this image URL to be null only in the else case, and we want them to be outside of the else, so they're gonna be under the try. Let's save this and test it out again, and instead of this, for now I'll just go with the previous message. I'll say friend created success. Let's just leave it like that and create a friend again. So this is the previous error that we have. Now let's send it, and there we go. Now it says friend created successfully, and let's try to get all of them. Previously we had 0, right? And now we have 1 that gives us all the values that we need, and the ID is 1. It is because it is the primary key and it is being incremented by 1. Let's copy this URL. I'll just get that and paste it into my into my browser, and I think I'll just control click to it. Okay, for some reason it doesn't open that up. So for some reason I can't really copy this or open that up, but it is gonna work. Even though we have a space here, it is perfectly fine, and we will see that it is working in the client section. So now that we have create friend method, now we can add some kind of validations. So what happens if the user don't pass this, let's see, in the body, what happens if they don't pass these two fields? We need to handle it and just return an appropriate message. And this is where we can add our validations. So we have our required fields. So before this, let's go ahead up here, and I'll just say check for required fields. So I'll say required fields, and I'll put them into an array. So I'll say name, role, it should be like this, description, and then the gender that we had. Okay, just like this. Now we're gonna loop through this required fields, and I will call all of them as field. So for field in required fields, if field not in data, if user didn't pass that, then we're gonna return an error. So I'll say JSONify, and I will pass this object, and I'll just send a dynamic error message. So I'll say f string, where I'll say missing required field, and I will put it into it like this. Then as the response or the status code, we'll say 400. let's go ahead and delete the gender and let's see what's gonna happen, and make sure to delete this comma as well. Let's send. Now it says gender is required and you're missing that. And if you don't pass this one and delete the comma, first it hits the description, so it says description is required, and you can, after we add all of them, it's going to actually create that. And now just be made sure that every time the gender is not going to be null, so you could delete this else check, but I think I'll just leave it so that you could see how you could use if, else if, and else in Python. Okay, so that's gonna be it for the create friend function. Let's build another one, which is gonna be to delete one. So you could take this as a challenge and try to do it. It shouldn't be really hard at this point, where you know the try and accept blocks. You can query a user, but I think there is something new that we'll see. So just maybe follow along with the video. So I'll say app.route. This is going to be my decorator and my route as well. So /API/friends, and we need to pass an ID so that we know which friend that we'd like to delete. So I'll say the type will be integer and I'll call it as ID, and we'll say the method, let's say methods, is going to be delete method, and we're going to put our function. So delete underscore friend. Let me just scroll a little bit down. We're going to take the ID and just make sure this ID is match whatever you put here. And we'll have our try block, and then let's say pass for now. Then we're going to have the accept, and I'll say exception as E. And while we're here, let's just return that. I'll say db.session.rollback. So roll back to the previous state because there is something unexpected just happened. I'll say JSONify. We could say error and convert that to be a string and just say 500, which is an internal error. And then we're going to get the friend. Let's say friend.query.get ID. So this is going to get the friend that we'd like to delete. What if this friend doesn't exist in our database? So we'll say if friend is none, we'll say return JSONify with an error. We'll say friend not found, and let's return the 404. But if this is not the case, we'll say session.delete, right? Delete the friend and just commit that. So db.session.commit. And finally, we're going to return an error back. I'm sorry, just a response, not an error. That's going to be JSONify because we have deleted that successfully, right? We're not going to return an error, but instead, let's say message. And just to be consistent with this one, I'll say MSG, and I'll say friend deleted, and just put 200 at the end. Let's test it out. We have, let's see how many users do we have. We have 2 of John Doe's, so we have ID of 2, ID of 1, and let's delete the second one. I will go ahead and duplicate this route first, or the request. I'll say delete friend and make this to be a delete method, save it, and as the ID, let's delete the second one. If I just sent that, there we go, it is not, it says it is not serializable. So let's see why this is the case. First, I will close those routes. So we have delete friend function that we take the ID as an argument. Under the try, we say friend, get that. So we pass the ID and friend if it is not none. So if it is none, just say not found, but else try to delete it. Now let's see on our console, what do we see? So I think I'll just send this again. This is a delete method, right? Okay, now it says friend not found. I think we have deleted that, but let's just see. We only have one John Doe, so it means we can actually delete successfully. Let's delete the ID of 1 as well, which is gonna be this one. If I delete that, okay, it's actually been deleted. Let's just make sure. There we go. But here, when we return a response, instead of putting a comma, that's going to be a colon, just like that. So that was my typo, sorry about that. If we try to create another one, so let's say we're going to have John. Let's go with Jane, who's going to be female. And let's go with Bob, who's going to be male. And let's say he works at Apple. Send that, get all of them. So we have Jane as well as Bob. Let's try to delete Jane with the ID of 1. Now it just says friend deleted successfully, and let's test it out, and there we go. We only have Bob now. And the other request that we'd like to add is going to be update. So I'll duplicate the delete one. Let's make it to be patch. You could go with the put as well. So I'll go with patch. We're gonna pass the ID of the user that we'd like to update, and in the body we're gonna send this data. And by the way, in the delete request, we don't really need to send body, or in the get we don't have body as well. Okay, so only in create we will send this, and also in update. So I'll go ahead and say update profile, or maybe friend. Now, when you want to update the profile, you only maybe want to update the name. So you don't really want to update the gender, the role, the description. In that case, you're only going to pass the name, and the other fields are just going to be the default with the previous one, right? Or maybe you just want to update the name and role, so the description and gender is going to be default. So we're going to keep that in mind and build our API depending on that. Let's save those and close them. Here I'll just put our very end route. Let's say update a friend profile, and that's going to be pretty similar to this one. I'll copy this and paste it. So we're going to have the ID, and method is going to be patch, just like that. And we're going to have a function, again I'll copy and paste, which is going to be not delete but update friend. We're going to take the ID, and we're going to have try, let's say pass for now, and accept exception as E. And I think I'll just copy and paste these 2 lines, just like that. And we need to put this colon. And now in the try, we would like to again get the friend in the DB. If it is not found, then we're going to return this error that says friend not found. But if this is not the case, first we would like to get the data that user sends us from the request, and we're going to convert it to be type of JSON. And now we would like to update, let's say friend dot name. So we'll say data dot get. We're gonna pass the key, which is name, and it is gonna give us the value. Let's say now user passed the name as Jane. Instead of John, let's say he's going to say Walt. So since we passed the key, it is gonna give us the value, and this is how it works. And if this is not being passed, by default we're gonna keep the friend.name as it was before. So let's say user only wants to update their role and not the name, so we're gonna keep the name as it was before. So that's what we are doing basically. I over explained that, but that's fine. Let's say friend.role. We're gonna get the role, and if it is not provided, then we're gonna keep the default value. And I'll do the same thing for, let's say, description. Oops, I have a typo here. So that's gonna be description. And the very last one is gonna be the gender. And I think in our client, I'm not going to allow the gender to be updated, but for now, let's put it like that. And at the very end, we'll just say db.session.commit, and you can immediately commit this because we have updated those fields directly. So we'll say return JSONify. We could say message and user updated successfully, but instead I'll just return the updated user data. So I'll say friend, and we need to convert that to JSON, and I'll say 200 status code. So with that, that should be it for our complete routes. Let's try to update a profile. So when we try to get all users, we can see we have ID of 2, who is Bob, right? I'll go ahead and try to update it. So friends 2, which is Bob, and I'll say he's gonna be Walt Doe, and role is gonna be SVE3. So if we just send this now, here we can see this is the updated data. We updated the role as well as the name, and for some reason it updated the description and gender. Let's see if I forgot to do something. Why did it updated that? So let's try to say get all. So we only updated the name, but for some reason, I'm sorry, we updated the name and role, but for some reason it updated the description and gender as well. Oh, it's because we forgot to update those fields, right? This is going to be description, and this should be gender, just like that. Okay, so with that in place, that should work. First, I'll delete this user from the database, and I'll create one, let's say John Doe SVE male, and I'll try to update his profile. Now, ID of him is gonna be 1, right? And let's go into the update. I'll say now he's gonna be Walt, and role is gonna be SVE3. If I just send that, it says friend not found because ID should be 1. Okay, so role has been updated and name has been updated. Let's just double check that. I just sent a request and there we go. This is the role and this is the name, and it is always going to be in that way because we just updated that. Now when it comes to the course error that we had previously, so we didn't actually get the error, but we configured this, right? Why this is the case, let's just try to understand it on a diagram. Okay, so we have just created our server, right? And next we're gonna have our client. I'll just go ahead and zoom in a little bit. Maybe make this a little bit larger like this. Okay, I'll just say this is my server that I have just created, which is running on this URL, localhost 5000, and that's gonna be my port. And now in a couple of minutes, we're gonna create our client, which is gonna be the React application. And it is going to be running on, let's say, localhost 3000. Now we would like to send requests from our client to the server, which is going to be to get all friends that we have, maybe create some friends, delete one, update one, and that's going to be all of our requests. But by default, server is not able to get those requests from a different website, because like this is a URL and this is a different one, and by default you can't really send requests from one website to another one because you're gonna get course errors, and this is the default mechanism that is put into the browsers. And it is really cool actually, but to be able to fix it, we'll like to use this course package, and we just wrapped our app with that so that we're gonna say to our server, you can actually get requests from this client. So now that you got the request, we allow to that, you can send a response back to the client. And when we send the request from client to server, that should be, let's say, json.stringify. So we need to stringify whatever you are returning or sending back to the server, and whatever you sent as a response, that should be type of JSON. That's why we have called JSONify in the response. So I hope now everything makes sense that we have created in this 3 different files. So we have our database, which is created by the help of this configuration, and we are not tracking modifications. We created the DB, we mounted our routes, we created all of our tables, and we are running our application only if we are running this file directly. And in our models, we had the friend, we specified fields that we'd like to have, the primary key, the optional field, and the ones that are not optional, and a function for our convenience, which is to convert an Python object or dictionary to the JSON. So we have used it in our routes when we JSONify our response, right? So here, let me just zoom out to see this file in a better way. Here we have get all friends route, where we just query them from the database and return them in this kind of list or array. And we have create a friend endpoint that we are fetching avatar based on the gender, and we have some validations going on. So let me just put a comment here. And then we just first add it into the session, which is going to be that staging area, and then we commit that and send a response back. And we are handling errors gracefully with the help of exceptions. Then we can delete a friend, update one, and that's going to be all of our methods and routes and handlers, which turns out to be our CRUD operations, right? So we have create, read, update, and delete. Now with this diagram that I have explained, at this point I think it is perfect time for you to pause the video and take a look at this entire code base and just try to understand why do we have cores implemented and why do we add this JSONify as well as this toJSON method. And also, if you have realized, we are sending this as image URL, and in Postman when we say get all friends, instead of getting image underscore URL, we're going to get this image URL, which is camel cased. It's because we have converted that to JSON, right? Which is in this image URL, so like camel case. Then we just send it to the client. Let's say up here. And that's why you are seeing image URL and not image underscore URL. So that's gonna be it for the backend. Later we're gonna come back to this file. So I'll just put a comment for now so that I don't forget that. So I'll say to do update this file for deployment. And we're gonna see this at the end of the video. So that's gonna be it for our entire backend. Let's just try to add a commit, and that's gonna be the first section. And in the next one, we're gonna build the UI. So we're just only focused on the design. And then in the third section, we're gonna connect both of them. And in the fourth one, we're going to deploy it, and we'll just conclude the course. So I'll go ahead, kill this terminal, and I want to deactivate my so to say virtual environment. So I'll say deactivate cd up to the root and clear my console, and I'll say git init. So that's going to initialize an empty git repository. And now there are files that we don't really want to keep track. Here you can see there are more than 2000 files pending changes. Here you can see on the right hand side it says 2093 pending changes. And to be able to get the one that we are not really interested, we can say git ignore, and for the content I'll just copy it and paste it, which you can grab it from the GitHub repo in the description below. So you can find the link, visit this git ignore, and copy the content and paste it. So basically we are not keep tracking of the virtual environment id files, .env files if we create any. So we have this friends db, we don't really care about that, at least in git, and we are just ignoring those folders and files as well. Once you have saved that, we're gonna see we got this kind of slate color. It has been ignored by git, and db has been ignored as well. And in the PyCache, again, we don't really see the cached results. We have only 4 changes, which is git ignore, app.py, models.py, and routes.py. Let's go ahead and add all of them to the staging area. And let's say first backend completed successfully. And instead, let's just say backend completed. And I'll commit my changes. And next, we're gonna build the front end UI design. And I'll see you there. Okay, so let's move on with the front end. So for some reason, I still have this highlighting, but if I just say Ctrl+Shift+P and reload window, if I click to that, it's gonna reload that, and hopefully we should get rid of that green color. And while it is being reloaded, let's just cd into the front end where we'd like to create a React application. So I'll say npm, and first let me just zoom in. Okay, npm create vite at latest. We are using vite to be able to create a React application under the front end folder. That's why we put dot at the end. So that means install it under the current folder. it's gonna ask us two different questions where we would like to go with React and JavaScript. So you could select TypeScript, but I want to keep it simple, so I'll go with JS, and I'll say npm install that's what they say, so that we could get that node modules folder under the front end, which is going to be our dependencies. So there we can see we got the node modules, and it's going to complete it in a second. Okay, so it has been installed, and let's just say npm run dev so that we can see our front-end application on this port. Let's go here. So in the diagram, I said that we'll be using this 3000 port, but it looks like it runs on 5173, which is fine. So it doesn't really matter. And if you want to change it, I think you can go into the vid config. You could say server, where you'll just say port is going to be 3000. Let's save, and there we go. Now if we visit localhost this 3000 port, we can see the React application that we just got. Now let's delete all this design, which is boilerplate code, right? I'll go into the source. First, I'll delete assets and delete index.css, app.css, and in the app.jsx, I think I'll just delete everything. Maybe I'll say h1 hello, and I'll go ahead, delete everything, and let's see the end result. Let's refresh. Something is not correct because we need to delete this index.css import because we don't really have that file. Okay, with that, now we can see the hello in our browser. So we'd like to use Chakra UI for our styling so that we could just speed up the process. So just type Chakra UI and then visit the documentation. And if you haven't used it before, it is a simple, modular, and accessible component library that gives you the building blocks you need to build your React applications. And it is going to make the UI design pretty fast. Let's say you want to use a button, you would just type it and see the documentation for that. Here we go. This is the end result, and this is the code that you need to copy and paste. There are different colors, variants, and let's say you would like to use a model. Just go ahead and visit that page, and you're gonna get this end result if you copy this code and paste it. And there are other kinds of components that you could use, so alerts, circular progresses, and just anything that you see here. And we would like to use a couple of them, and let's just go ahead and get started with it. So I'll go ahead and scroll to the Vite framework guide, and it is gonna tell us to copy this command and paste it into our terminal. So I'll just split this into two and just make sure you're under the front end folder. So paste it, and then let's see what is going to be the next step. It is going to be to wrap our application with the provider that it gives us. So I'll copy this import, and I'll just visit the main.jsx, paste it, and wrap my application with it. So Chakra provider, put the app into it, then close that off. So with the help of this, now we are able to use any kind of component that is coming from Chakra in our application. Let's test it out. In the homepage, I'll just say button, import it, and we'll just say hello into it. If we save, we should be able to see this button that you can see on the screen. In your case, that might be in the light mode. In my case, it is a dark mode, but we're going to fix it, and we're going to make it just like this in our demo application. I will just keep that open for our reference. So let's go ahead and start with the navbar. And here we can see there is navbar in the middle of the screen, and for that we'll be using container, which is a component that is coming from Chakra as well. So you can always take a look at the documentation for any component that we'll be using from here on out. So the very first thing that I'll put is going to be my stack. Again, this is coming from Chakra, and let's say minimum height of 100 VH, which is our entire screen. And stack is going to put everything in the vertical direction, and at the very top we would like to see our navbar, which is a component that we'll create in a second. Then we're going to put the rest of our application into a container so that they are in the middle of the screen, which is going to have the maximum width of, let's say, 1200 pixels and margin y of 4. So from the top, from the bottom, let's give margin y of 4 units. Then let's create the navbar component. For that, I'll create a components folder and put my navbar into it. Now at this point, I'll just say RAFCE and get this boilerplate code. And for that, you can go and install this extension called ES7 React Redux React Native Snippets, and just use it like me and just use it like me so that you can get this RAFCE, this code. Okay, we have a functional React component, which is navbar. Let's save it and import it. And we're going to design it in a second. So this is navbar that we can see. And navbar is also gonna have that kind of let's say container, so that this is in the middle of the screen. I'll go ahead and I'll say container and import it from Chakra, which is gonna have the maximum width of 900 pixels. And inside, let's see what we're gonna have. We're gonna have a box, which is a div basically, and it is coming from Chakra as well. We're gonna put flex into it. Let's import it. And then we're gonna have one flex on the left and another one on the right. Okay, I'll just say left side and then the right side, because in the navbar we're gonna have this thing on the left and then this one on the right. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and write a couple of different styles into this box. I'll say padding x of 4 and margin y of 4. Let's say my, and then it's gonna have the border radius of 5, just like that. And this flex is gonna have height of, let's say, 16, and let's see, we'll just say align items is gonna be center, and justify content is gonna be space between, just like this. And on the left hand side, we're gonna have again justify content of center, and then align items of center as well. So just like this, justify content, and I'll say center so that it is centered, and then gap of 3, and we're gonna make it responsive, and you'll see what that means in a second. We'll say display, and you need to pass another object into it. So we'll say smaller screens and above, it's gonna be flex. So maybe above the phone screens, we're gonna show this flex on the left, but in the base and above, we'll just say it's gonna be none. So maybe on mobile phones, we're not gonna show that, and on the tablets and above, we're going to show it. So this is a breakpoint that is coming from Chakra, and we'll just see this in a second. And on the left, we're gonna have 3 different images. So React PNG, Python PNG, and this explode head. And you can grab them from the GitHub repo and just put it into this public folder, and the link will be in the description. Head over to the under the front end, under the public, right? Get those images, and that's what I'll be doing now. I will copy all of them and then just paste it into here. So we have explode, Python, and React PNGs. So here I'll just say image, and source is going to be under the public react.png, and alt, let's say React logo, which is going to have a width of 50 and height of 50 as well. And we're going to have one more image, which is Python PNG, and then explode.png. So this is going to have, I think, 45 height as well as the width, and let's say explode head logo, or maybe just explode head, and we'll say explode.png, and this is going to be python.png. Let's say Python logo, and make this capitalized, just like this. And width is going to be 50, but height is going to be 40, and feel free to change it. And now we're going to have the images, but in between we're going to have 2 text. So after the React, we're going to have this plus icon, and after Python, we're going to have this equal text, right? I'll just say text, which is again a component that is coming from Chakra. I'll just import that, and by default, that's going to be p tag. So I'll say font size, let's say 40 pixels. So I'll just put pixels at the end. I'll say plus and duplicate this, and I'll put equal just like this. And let's see what we're gonna get. So there we go. And now let's try to add the right hand side, then we will add this background. And maybe before that, let's go ahead and add the background. I'll say background will be gray 700. This is a color that is coming from Chakra. Let's see, this is the output. And if we go into, let's say, after 500 pixels, we're okay, even 480 pixels, we are not gonna see these images because this is what we have set, right? We say smaller screens and above, that's gonna be flex, but below that, it is gonna be none. So here, this is smaller screens and above up until, the larger pixels. But from, let's say, here and out, it's going to hit the base case and we're not going to see that. We just say display is going to be none. And now on the right hand side, we're going to have, again, one flex, right? It's going to have a gap of 3 in children, and we'll say align items is going to be center. And we're going to have one text that says BFF ship, which is something that I'll copy and paste. It has font size of large, font weight of 500, display base of none, and MD of block, which is gonna make it responsive as well. Because if we take a look at the demo, so here after the medium breakpoint, which is 768 pixels, I don't really see this text. And this is what we're doing here. And below that, we're gonna have a button, just like this. Let's say button imported from Chakra, and this is gonna have dark and light mode. So I'll go ahead and say if color mode is equal to light, then we're gonna show an icon, let's say IO moon, and oops, in the dark mode we're gonna show this let's say LU sun, which is gonna have the size of 20. And now what is this color mode and these icons are coming from? We're gonna see this in a second, and let's do it actually right now. If I just say color mode, this is gonna give us the light and dark mode. Just like that, we could implement it. Let's just see, maybe dark mode. Or maybe I'll just say use color mode in the second one. So this is what they give us. You would get this hook and the values, which is going to give you the color mode, and you can change it with this toggle color mode function. I'll just copy it and go ahead, paste it, import this one, and when I click to this button, I'll say on click, just call this function. And for the icons, we're going to be using an icon library or package. I'll say npm install react-icons, and just make sure you are under the front end. Okay, this is going to install it, and then we'll be able to use these icons. And if you haven't used it, just visit React icons and you can get any kind of components that you would need. If I just say phone, it is going to give me all kinds of options which I can copy the import and then paste the component. In our case, we are using IO moon and LU sun, right? So these are the icons. I'll just put the imports. Then if we save, hopefully we should be able to see something on the screen. Just like this, and this is gonna toggle the color mode, but this background doesn't change because it is hard-coded, right? We just say color mode always is gonna be gray 700, but if I want to make it dynamic, I can use this use color mode value that is coming from Chakra UI, and the first option is gonna be the light mode, which is gray 200, and the second one is gonna be for the dark mode, and I'd like to use gray 700. Let's go ahead and test it out. There you go. This is the output that we have. Now later we're going to add this button, which will open up this model, and for now let's just skip that, and we're going to add it in the incoming sections. The next thing that we'd like to do, maybe just add this title, right? For this, we're gonna go into the app.jsx, and we will add one text into this container. I'll say text, and import it from Chakra UI, and it's gonna have a couple of different properties, and I think I'll just paste all of them so that we don't really waste too much time. So font weight of bold, letter spacing of 2 pixels, text transform of uppercase, and text align center, margin bottom of 8. And again, we're gonna make it responsive. So in the medium screens and above, it's gonna be 50 pixels or units, and it's gonna be below the medium screens, it's gonna have this 3x large. And let's see how this will look like in the demo application. So here you can see like the title just gets a little bit smaller when you hit that medium breakpoint. Okay, now let's give this background gradient, and before that, if we just say this can have one more text, let's say my besties, and we're gonna put a couple of different classes as well. For now, let's just say this is gonna be a span, and this is how we can say text as span, and we're gonna put an icon below this text. So let's save. This is the output that we have, and to be able to get this gradient, you can visit the documentation, and I have already done that. So I'll go ahead and grab this two different properties, which is going to be the background gradient as well as the background clip of text. So it's going to start from the left to the right, from this color to this one, and this is the output that we have now. Below this, we'll like to have this user grid, and for that I'll create a component. So I will go ahead and just say user grid, and we will create it in a second. Say user grid .jsx. Let's say RAFCE, and since we are not using this button, let's just delete it and import this one into it. Okay, so we have our title as well as our user grid, and now it is time to build it. And maybe even before that, we can build this create user model, right? I'll go ahead and open this up. I'll say create user model.jsx, and we're going to import it in a second. That's going to be under the navbar below, next to this button, right? I'll say create user model, and there we go. This is what we have, but we're going to fix it in a second. Let's close these, and here the very first thing that we'll like to have is just going to be an empty fragment so that we can put multiple children into it. So I'll say button and import it from Chakra. Then it's going to have, let's say, this icon called bi add to queue, and we'd like to import this from React icons /bi. And now we're going to use a model, right? Just like this. And for that, you can visit the documentation, take a look at that, how that works. So we have this use disclosure hook, and then a model overlay, content, header, close button, body, and footer if you wanted to. Then when you click to that button, it's gonna call the onOpen function, which is gonna make that open. And when you click outside or into this close button, it's going to close it, and it's going to determine if it is open or not with the help of these variables. So I'll go ahead and copy this line first, paste it, import that one, and let's say this is going to have a size of, let's say, size of 20, and below that we're going to have our model. Again, coming from Chakra, it's going to have a couple of different properties, such as is open, pasted, on close function, and then we're gonna have a model overlay, get that, and we're gonna have a, let's say, model content. Then let's see what we're gonna have if I can close this off correctly. Into that, we're gonna have a model header. Okay, so model header, and you can find all of them in the let's say the Chakra documentation. Okay, so I'll just put this with an emoji. Then below that, we're gonna have model close button. Let's import it. Then inside that, we're gonna have a model body, so just like here, and we're gonna put the rest of the content into this one. Let's import this component as well, which is gonna have padding bottom of 6. So this is gonna have a flex, right? I'll say flex, import that one, and we'll say align items is gonna be center and then gap of 4. So this is gonna hold a form label and input, and you would like to put them into a form control, again coming from Chakra, and we'll just say form label, and that's gonna be not first name but let's say full name, and below that we're gonna have an input component which is gonna have the placeholder of let's say John Doe. If we save, we should be able to see it. So this is the icon or the button that we have. When we click to it, nothing happens. Let's see, because we didn't call this on open function. So we'll say on click, we'll say on open, call that function. And there we go. This is what we have. So we would like to have this output. This is going to be on the left and this is going to be on the right. That means into this flex, we're going to have one more form control so that we can have something on the left, right? And this is going to be on the right. So this is what flex allows us to have. And here I'll just say role. Now let's just put as an example, software engineer. Just like that. And below this, we're going to have one more form control. And now since you are comfortable writing this, I will paste it actually. We have form control, margin top of 4, form label, and then text area, which is coming from, again, Chakra UI. There we can see. And always feel free to take a look at it from the documentation. And here is a placeholder. And this is going to be the example. Let's just see. This is the output that we can get in our model. Now below that, we're going to have this radio buttons. And again, I think I will just copy it and paste it because it's pretty simple. Just like this, import this one. It's going to have radio with a value of male and female, and it has gap of 5. And the default value is male for now with lowercase m. And I think this is not going to have any effect, but we're going to fix it later. Okay, so it has already. And let's close this notification. And let's say this is going to be female. It is, let's see if it is going to work. Okay, this is selected by default. And maybe we don't really need to have a value. Let's delete that. So we don't need the default value, but we're going to hold the values for radio buttons. Okay, below the model body, we're going to add a footer that is going to hold 2 different buttons. So here I'll just go ahead and say model footer and import it from Chakra, which is going to have a button that's going to say add, and the other one is just going to say cancel so that you can close the model. Just like this, a button that says add, we have color scheme of blue, margin right of 3, and this just close the model. Let's save and test it out. Here you can see it just works as expected, and this doesn't do anything for now, but we'll add it later in the course. Okay, so next let's add the user grid, which is gonna hold all of our user cards. So I'll go ahead and say grid, which is coming from Chakra, that you could take a look at it from the documentation. And let's say this is gonna have template, columns, and this is going to be dynamic so that we could have this responsive design. So in the smaller screens, we're going to say base of 1 FR, right, 1 fraction, and then medium screens and above, we're going to just repeat that twice. Then we'll say on the large screens and above, it's going to be 3 fractions. Let's see in the demo, this is the large screen, and if we go into this endpoint, breakpoint, it's gonna be 2, and if we just hit the medium, it's gonna be like 1 card at a time, and this is gonna be responsive. So this is what we are doing currently. Now we don't have any users, so let's try to have some fake data. For that, I'll go under the source and I'll just say lib, and maybe below that I'll say, or maybe let's just keep it simple and I'll just rename this to be dummy and here we'll create a file. I'll say dummy.js, and you can grab this from the GitHub repo, which is going to be an array of users. Each has an ID, name, role, and description, and in total there are 7 different users. So I'll go ahead and say inside this grid we're going to just try to map them out. So in the grid I'll just say users, import it from this file that we have just created, map that, and for each user show the user card component, which is something that we will create in a second. So I'll say rafce, save that one and import it, and we're gonna try to just write the design for this, which is gonna be pretty basic. So I'll save, and here the very first thing that we'll have is gonna be a card component, and it's gonna have a card header, which is gonna have a flex. Let's import all of them, and now again we are gonna have something on the left, right? I'll say flex, and then one more that's gonna be on the right. So on the left hand side we're gonna have the avatar, and then this username, and let's say user role, and then on the right hand side we're gonna have these buttons. So we could just type this actually one by one, but I'll go ahead and paste the content so that we could move faster. So in the first flex, get an avatar component, paste the source, and let's say we're gonna get a heading as well as the text, and this user is gonna be coming as a prop, right? I'll save now, so we have a warning, but we'll fix it. And this flex is gonna have, let's say, flex of 1, so that it's gonna take the entire width, the remaining width, I'm sorry, and gap of 4, let's say, align items of center, just like that. And the first flex is gonna have, let's say, gap of 4. And on the right hand side we're gonna have an edit model, because when you click to this, it's gonna open up this model, and I'll just for now say edit model and just keep it as a comment. Then on the right hand side we're gonna have an icon button, so get that and import the icon from React Icons, and let's just save, and what we're gonna see on the screen, there we go. So we have a card, right? For each user we have an image, the full name, description, and a button. Let's give, I don't know why this gap didn't work, let's just say maybe spacing. Is that gonna work? No, it doesn't, because it is not for the card, because we're gonna go into the user grid and add it into here. If we just say gap of 4, and there we go, now it is working correctly. And the very last thing that we'd like to add is gonna be this description. So for this I'll head over to the user card. Below the header I'll just say card body, and I'll say under the text just put the user description. And now we are getting this ESLint prop validation warning. We could turn that off under the vid config, I'm sorry, ESLint file. We'll just say react prop types is gonna be off. Let's save this one, and now we should be able to get rid of those errors. And we're gonna save this file and just test it out in the browser. So here we can see we have a description for each user, and we have this button, and everything works as expected. Now let's try to add this like edit icon, and when we click to that we're gonna see this model. So for this we need to maybe first go into here and just open this up, delete the user for now, and create that component. I'll say edit model.jsx, create it and import it into this file, and we're gonna put the content now. So again, this is gonna be pretty similar model, so I'm not going to type it from scratch, but instead I will just copy it and paste it, because it's pretty much the same thing. So I will go ahead and paste it. So if you want to get this started code, I will paste it again, and you can grab that from the GitHub repo. So I'll just go above, and comment this out. You can grab this one and just paste it just like me. And this takes the user for now. Just let's delete that. Okay. So let's see if this is gonna work. If I click that, I can see this model which has the, okay, this is the demo application. Let's go into this one. If I clicked it, I can see the full name, role, the description, and in the demo application, here we can see we cannot really update the gender, and that's what I'd like to do. So I'll go into the edit model, and let's delete this radio group just like that. And now we can't really see it, but we have the full name, role, description, and these buttons, and it is the exact same component with this one. And you could make that reusable instead of creating one for edit model and one for create user model. But I want to keep it simple and just copy and paste that in this case. But it's absolutely fine to create and make that reusable. And let's see what is going to be the next component. I think we have completed everything. So we have navbar, light and dark mode, edit model, edit model here, and then create model here. And we have the delete icon. For now, it doesn't work, but that's fine because that was only the UI design. So let's go ahead and add all of our changes. I'll close everything and go here, add to the staging area, and I'll say second part UI design completed, and I'll commit my changes. And with that, I'll see you in the next section where we connect our front end to our back end. Okay, now in this section, let's connect both of these services that we have created. So in my terminal, I have front end up and running. So I'll create another one, and I'll first cd into the backend, and I will first activate my virtual environment. So I'll say venv, go into the scripts, and then activate run this script. Here you can see it is active, and I'll say flask run and -- reload in case we change anything in this folder. So it's going to reload the server for us. And for some reason it did not work because I had a typo here. I'll say flask run -- reload. And there we go. So let's visit that under the /API/friends. And this is what I have in my database. Okay, everything is up and running, and let's try to connect from our React application to this Flask REST API that we have created. So we're going to store users, and normally this will be the place that we would like to store in a state. Let's say users, set users, and by default this is going to be an empty array. But since we are going to be using this in the navbar as well, so I would like to create it in the app. So we're going to pass the set users to the navbar just like this. And let's get the use state, by the way. And we're going to pass the users to the user grid. So the only reason that we are creating this state in the app.jsx and not in the user grid is because I would like to pass this set users to the navbar component. Let's keep it simple, and if you want, you could use React context for this, or maybe zoostand, recoil, maybe even Redux, but we would like to just keep it simple and don't use anything in this application, which is perfectly fine because this is not a huge application. So it's fine to just do prop rolling a couple of times. So I'll go ahead and take the users, and when we run this component, we would like to just send a request, and we can do this with the help of use effect. So I'll say use effect and just run this in the first go. So I'll just leave this like dependency array empty, right? This is what we have, dependency array, and then here we'd like to have our logic. First I'll say get users, which is going to be an async function, and we'd like to have a try catch block, and we'd like to have, let's say, loading state is loading, and by default I think we could just give it to be true. And here I'll say const res await fetch, which is going to be localhost 5000, and if you want you could say 127.0.0.1, which means to localhost as well. and we're gonna say /API/friends. So we'd like to fetch them, and we'll say const data, and this is gonna be in a format that you need to JSONify. So we'll just say res.json, and we'll say if res dot OK is false, so if it is not 200 success code, then we'll just throw, let's say, new error, and we'll say data.error, because that's what we have returned from the API. But if this is not the case, which means it was successfully completed, we'll just say set users to the data, and we need to get this set users as well. So let's copy this and paste it to here. Okay, it's going to be this setter function that we are passing as a prop. And in the catch, we could say console.error and show the error in the console. And we'll say finally, we'll say set is loading will be false. And here this wants us to pass set users because we are taking as a prop, but this is never going to change, so it is really safe to pass that. And we'll say get users, which is going to give us the users state. Instead of using this fake users, I'll delete that and replace it with the actual users that we are fetching. And if we do this, let's see what we're gonna see. And this is the user that we are storing in our database, right? So let's add some kind of loading state as well. So we already have it, which we are making it to be true when this component runs. And below this users, and even below the grid, first I'll create a fragment and wrap this with that so that I can put multiple children. Okay, so below the grid, I'll say if it is loading, I'll just say end, and we're gonna just show a spinner. So I'll say flex. Inside that, we're gonna have this spinner component, which we're getting from Chakra. Let's save, and for a split second, we're gonna see that loading in the middle of the screen. Okay, so it is pretty fast, so we cannot really see it, but if our connection was slow, we would see this spinner, which is coming from Chakra, right? We just call this spinner and give it a size. Okay, so that's the first thing that we have done. And if we don't have any users in the database, we're gonna say no friends found. And for this, I will again copy and paste it. Pretty simple design. So I'll just import the text from Chakra. So we say if it is not loading and if the users.length is equal to 0, that means you're pretty poor and you don't have any friends. And let's save. For now, we cannot really see that because users.length is not equal to 0, but let's just explicitly say this is going to be true. And let's remove this for now. And there you go. Now we just see no friends found. And let's just do Control Z and just like this. So that's going to be for the user grid. And I think the next thing that we'd like to do is maybe create a user. For that, we're going to go into the create user model. I'll just scroll at the very top. And again, let's create a loading state. I'll say const is loading, set is loading, and by default, this is going to be false. And we're only going to make it true when we click to the add button. And now we'll say const inputs set inputs, which is going to be an empty object for now. So these inputs are going to be whatever user type here. We're going to store them in a state. So let's say they type John Doe. Let's say they put software engineer here. So blah, blah, blah. And we're going to have the description, the gender. We're going to store all of them in the state. And when they click to it, we're going to send a request to save it in the database. So that's what we're doing. And I'll just say name is going to be an empty string. Role is going to be again. So description as well as the gender we'll just give. Now we would like to bind them into this inputs. So this is the full name. We'll just say value is going to be inputs.name, and on change, we're going to only update the name in this state. Let's do the same thing for the role. This is going to have the value inputs.role, and we're going to only update that field. Let's do the same thing for description as well as the radio buttons. So on change, we're gonna take all the inputs, and let's say the gender is gonna be e.target.value. Let's do the same thing to this one. Set inputs, just keep them as it is, and only update the gender with the value of female. And now we're gonna wrap this into, let's say, into a form. So model content, right? Let's just scroll at the very top. I'll say this is gonna be a form so that we could submit this. So under the model content, I'll wrap it just like that, and I'll say on submit, just run this, let's say alert user created. Okay, I'll just put my value, and if I just add that, it didn't work. It's because we need to say this button is gonna be type of input. I'll go ahead and I'll say type is gonna be submit, not input. Okay, if I just click to that, it says user created, but it was fake actually. Let's go ahead and add that function. In the form, I'll say handle create user, and let's create that function now. It's going to be async function. It's going to take the try catch, and we don't really want to page reload. We'll say e.prevent default. Okay, let's say prevent page reload, or maybe refresh. If you don't put this, and if you submit the form, it's going to reload the page. But if you put that, it is not going to reload. Okay, so in the try, the very first thing we would like to do is just send a post request to our endpoint. So I'll say const res await fetch. Now every time we need to say http localhost 5000/API/friends, and I don't really want to do this, so I'm gonna go ahead and take this up until here and just put it into a variable. So in the app, I'll just say export const base underscore URL. So all of them are uppercase because this is a constant, and I will paste it. And let's just make it string. And if you want to, you can just say 127.0.0.1, which means it's gonna be a localhost. So instead of using it like this, I'll just say whatever the base URL is plus friends, and the second object we're gonna pass it to be able to describe our method. So I'll just scroll a little bit down. We'll say method is gonna be post, headers is gonna be content type of application JSON, and we'd like to stringify our inputs. So we're gonna put the body field, and we need to call this method, and it was this thing that I have told about. When you send some data from client to server, you need to just stringify it first, and the vice versa happens. They need to JSONify it somehow so that you can get that data. And here now, after we have done this, we'll say const data and say await res.json. If res is not okay, we'll just throw the error, but otherwise we will just say show a toast. So if you don't know what a toast is, let's take a look at it. So when you click to this, you're gonna get this success state, and let's say if it was error and just click to it, this is gonna be this pink color that shows something went wrong, and you can put the title, right, the description, and the duration status, and if it is closable or not. So we're gonna get this line and then call the function with an object. Let's import it from Chakra, right, use toast, and we will just call that function. I'll say toast, and maybe at this point I can copy and paste it. So here I just say status was success, title it says congratulations, description friend created successfully, the duration, and the position. And after we have done that, we can close the model by calling the onClose function. This is what we are getting, and there is one more thing that we'll do in a second. So I'll just say to do, And in the catch, we can just show an error, right? So I'll just paste that. So it says an error occurred with the error message. And then in the finally, we're gonna say set is loading to be false. And we can say set inputs and just reset the values. So we're gonna clear the inputs. Name, role, description, and the gender is gonna be an empty string as well. And when we call this function, or even before that, we could say before the try, we'll say set is loading to be true. And while this is true, we can show a spinner in the button. I'll say is loading is gonna depend on this is loading state, which is coming from like use state. And let's test it out. I'll go ahead and try to create a user. I'll say Bob Doe, let's say software engineer, and we'll just say something goes here. Select the gender and try to add it. We should have a loading state and it says friend created successfully, but we cannot really see it here unless we refresh the page. Now we can see that, but I don't really want to refresh the page to be able to see it. So that's why we have added this to do. We'll say set users, call this function. So just keep all the previous users and add the latest one that we have created. And let's get this set users as a prop. And we need to add it, we need to pass this in the navbar. So we're gonna get the set users because we have passed it, right? Navbar takes the set users and this is gonna take it and paste it into the create user model. So set users, and this should be working now. I'll go ahead and create one. I'll say Jane, and put something here and some value here, and I'll say female. If we add that, now we can see it here. Even though it doesn't really work fine, we're gonna fix it. And the reason this is not working fine is because instead of returning the user, we are returning a message. Let's go into the routes, create a friend. Instead of this message, we're gonna send the newly created user. So say new underscore friend dot to underscore Jason. So we are going to get this as this data and we're going to append it to this array. Let's just refresh and test it out. Now all of them has the same profile image. Why this is the case? We're gonna fix it, but first let's say another user, software engineer as well, and let's just put something random here. And there we go, this is created and we can get the actual value. And let's see why do we get the exact same profile images for each user. I'll go ahead and say console.log the users. So we have this one, username is Jane, and then we have another user, and I think it's because we didn't update in the user card. Let me just close everything. Instead of keeping this static value, we'll say user dot what was it? So image URL. If we save, it should hopefully update to the actual images that we are storing in the database. So perfect. Now we can get users which have a loading state. We can create one, right? I'll just put something random here and it's going to immediately update the UI. Now next, let's try to delete one. Then we're going to add the edit functionality. And before that, I think I'll go into the user grid, and instead of adding this endpoint like this, I'll just say base URL plus friends. And that should work fine. There you go. Now let's add delete one. For this, we're gonna go into the user card, which has this, let's see, delete icon. And I'll say on click to this, we're gonna call handle delete user. And let's create this function. So that should be const, if I can type, async. We're gonna call this function. It's gonna have try catch. Let's say const res await fetch base URL. Let's import it plus friends, and we need to pass the user ID because this is what we are accepting in this endpoint, so that we know which user we are deleting. Then we're gonna put the method as a delete. We're gonna get some data back, and we'll say if it is not okay, throw this error, and otherwise we are gonna just remove that from the state. So I'll say set users. We will say set users and filter out the one that we are deleting. So this is gonna do that magic behind the scenes, and we would like to show some kind of toast. I'll say const toast, use toast, and I'll say toast, call it with this object. It's gonna have a title, status, duration, and is closable field. In the catch, we're gonna do the same thing, but for error with the error status, and let's test it out if this is gonna work or not. Now we need to check if we are passing the set users to the user card. If we go into the user grid, no, we are not passing. So let's say set users is gonna be set users function that we have above, right? Okay, I'll save and let's test it out. If I click to this, it's going to delete it and it's going to say user deleted successfully. And let's change this toast. So head over to the user card component and just update this toast with this one where we update the position and we say friend deleted successfully. Or you could say user deleted successfully, that's fine. And then in the catch case, I think we could also add the position. That's gonna be, let's say, position to be top center. And let's test it out. If I delete this one, it says friend deleted successfully, and we can just delete all of them one by one. And at the end, if we don't have anyone, it's gonna say no friends found. But for testing purposes, let's add one. I'll just get these default values and put something here and create another one. I'll say chain, and let's create that one. So we have both of these users, and let's create the edit user functionality. For that, we're gonna go into the edit model. And as always, this component is also gonna take the set users function so that we can update it immediately in the UI. And we'd like to pass the user as well because we're gonna use it in a second. So we're gonna go into the user card and pass those fields into that component. So here I'll just say set users. Okay, just pass the user and set users into it. Let's go ahead and get that. Now when we click to that button, let's see. So instead of saying add, we would like to just say update. I'll fix this. And I'll say maybe wrap this into a form, this model content. So I'll say form. It's gonna have on submit. Let's say handle, maybe edit user, and then we're gonna wrap this. Oops, I'm going to wrap this model content, and just like this. Then I'll say this button is gonna have type of submit, and oops, let's say type submit, and is loading. Again, it's gonna have this state. So let's go above and create all of them. So first we'll say const is loading, and by default that's gonna be false. We're going to update that. We're gonna have inputs, say const inputs, set inputs, and again that's gonna be an object which is gonna have the name, the role, oops, let's say role, and then the description. You can pass the gender, but I don't really want to do it. So in the edit functionality, we're not gonna be able to update the gender. and the initial value is going to be the current one, so that if I want to update this profile, when I clicked it, I'm going to get the current one, and I can just update whatever I want to put, and it's going to update. For now, it just has some lag in the demo, but for now, let's go ahead with this one. And we're going to have that function that we called const handle edit user. It's going to take the event, and let's say event.prevent default, so that it doesn't refresh the page, and we'll say set is loading to be true. Then we'll have the try catch. We'll say const res, and when we want to update a profile, we again want to send the user ID with a method of patch. So not put, but we have used patch, and we're gonna pass the headers, content type of application JSON. Then we're gonna send the body as like stringifying it, right? Then let's close this off. We're gonna get the data, and we'll say if response was not okay, throw the error. But in the else case, we're going to update the user profile. So this is how we can do it. We're basically mapping through the current user's state, and we just update that one with the data we got back. And we need to go into our routes. When we update a friend, we need to just send the newly updated friend. So you don't really want to say message and friend profile updated. Okay, so instead you want to send the friend immediately, because you're going to use it as the new state. And then we would like to just show a toast that says maybe user updated successfully, and then we're gonna close the model. Let's get the toast. I'll go above, I'll say const toast, and maybe give a bit space, import the base URL. And in the catch, we're gonna show again a toast, and let's say position is gonna be top center as well. And in the finally case, we're gonna say is loading is gonna be false. Okay, I think everything should work fine at this point, but we forgot to bind this into the inputs. So this is the full name. We need to say value is gonna be inputs.name, and on change where we only want to update the name. Same for the role and for the description. Let's fix this first. I'll add the value and then the onChange function. Okay, let's go ahead and test it out. This is our application at localhost. I'll say Jane, maybe Doe at the end. I'll say SVE3 and updated description. If I just update, it's going to do the magic. And let's say I only want to update the role. If I say SVE2 and just keep these fields as they were, so it's only going to update the role. And there we go. Now there is one issue where when we want to create a user, if we just pass all this, if we just leave all these fields empty, it's going to create this still. And it's because when we do the validation, we are missing something. So in the models, in the routes, when we try to create a friend, we are not only going to check if this field is in the data or not, but we are also going to check if it is empty or not. So we'll say and, or maybe or, if this value is empty. If we save, hopefully this should work. So either if it is not there or if the value is empty, we're going to show this error. Okay, I'll just refresh, delete this one, and try to add it again. Now it says name is required. Let's add something. And if you just send this again, it's going to say role is required, right? If you just add the description, or if we pass it, oops, so what happened? Let me just refresh and try this again. So name is required. Okay, let's put something. Role is required, and let's put something. And again, it just refreshed the state. Let's see why this is the case. In the create user model, so we are going to say, instead of in the finally case, we are only going to clear this inputs in the success case. So we can put it at the very end, and now it should do the magic. So here, if I just say add, it's going to give me the error, but it is not going to clear the fields. It says description is required. Let's add something here as well. And now it says gender is required. And let's add it. Hopefully it should create now. So that was just a fix that we need to add this check into our routes.py file. And with this, I think we have completed our application where we have light, dark mode. We can delete the user, create one, handle the errors, just like that. And we can update profile. So let's say updated description 3 is going to update it. And if we don't have any friends, we're going to see this kind of feedback. Let's add a commit. And next we're going to deploy this application. So I'll just close everything and add my changes. I'll say third connected front end to the backend and just commit this. And I'll see you in the next section. Okay, so now we are ready to deploy this application. And if we remember, we had a to-do in this app.py file, which we said that we're going to update this file for deployment. And before that, let's just make sure that we have front end and back end up and running. So I just cd into the backend, activate my virtual environment, and just run my Flask app. And it is running on this 5000 port on localhost. And same for the front end. In a different terminal, I cd into the front end and just type npm run dev. So I have my React application at this 3000 port, right? So this is the React app, and this is the API that we have. Right, this is the server at 5000 port. Now what I want to do is that when I visit localhost 5000, I would like to get my React application here. And currently we cannot get anything because we don't really have any endpoints in server for this root route, right? And now this is the current situation in our application. We have server that is served in this URL and client on this one. And what I want to do is just maybe kill this URL and take this client and put it under the localhost 5000. So I'll have my server as well as my client in just one URL. And this is what we'll be using in the deployment as well, right? So I'll go ahead and actually configure it. Now in the deployment part, we are gonna have this script or the command. So we are gonna cd into the front end, and if we just type npm run build, we're gonna get a dist folder under the front end, which is gonna be the optimized version of our React application. So it's gonna put static assets into that dist folder, and we'll be using that to be able to serve our React application. So here it just says built in 11 seconds, and this is that React app that we have just built. So here is the JavaScript code that has been minified, and this will be used in the production environment. Now I would like to get the front end folder route so that I can serve it under this localhost 5000. Let's just type it out and it's gonna make a lot of sense. So I'll say front end underscore folder, and we're gonna use OS, which is operating system module that is built into Python. So I'll say import OS, and we'll say os.path, and let me just deactivate this copilot, and I'll disable completions for Python so that it doesn't get any distracting. So path.join, so we are gonna get the current working directory. So we'll say os.get cwd and call this function, which is gonna be the backend folder, because this is gonna be the place we're gonna run this file. Okay, so now we are in the backend folder. We'll just go one up, so just put 2 dots. Now we are going one up, we are in the root, and we would like to go into the front end. So I'll just say comma front end folder, and then we would like to get the dist folder, and you can just put the dist like this. So you're in the front end and you're gonna get into the dist. And if you want to make it a little bit more descriptive, we can just say dist underscore folder, and I'll say os.path dot join the front end folder, and then inside that go into the dist folder. So feel free to use the one that you'd like to use. So maybe delete this line and put the dist here, but this is what I'll be doing just to keep it a little bit more readable, or maybe beginner friendly. And then we are gonna have our routes. So currently we have our API routes, right? I'll say API routes, which is to create, delete, update, and get all friends. But now we'd like to have one more route to serve static files from the dist folder under, oops, if I can type, under the front end directory. So this is going to be the React application, and this is the route that we are setting up. So it's going to have app.route, the root route, and now we're going to put the defaults option, which is going to have the file name as an empty string, and this is going to make sense in a second. Then we're going to have one more, so I'll just say at app.route, and here it is going to be dynamic, so path and file name, and then we're going to have our handler function. So I'll just define that. I'll say def index, it's going to take the file name, then we'll say if not file name, then we'll just say file name will be index.html, and that should be a string. And eventually we'll just say return sent underscore from directory, and we're gonna say the dist folder where we have the file name, which is gonna be the index.html, because if you visit the dist, you have this index.html, which is the entry point for the React application. And where is this function is coming from is gonna be from Flask. So just put a comma and import that as well. Now with this, we have set it up our route to be able to get that static files from the dist folder. Now if you visit any routes, so any of API routes, let's just see that. So that could be, I'll just scroll at the top. So that could be API friends with the get method. You're gonna fetch all of them from the database. Then you can send a post request to the same endpoint. You're gonna get you'll be able to create a friend. Then you can update one, delete one. Okay, these are the all routes that we have set it up. And if you visit the homepage, you're gonna get the React application. So I think that's gonna be for the deployment part. And let's see if we can test it out. I will save. And if we visit localhost 5000 now, we can get our React application, right? But we had normally this was running on 3000 port, but now we have set it up in a way that it's going to serve our React application under this URL, because this is what we are saying. So any other routes than these, you're going to serve us the index.html file, which is our React application. Now I hope that makes sense, and let's add a commit for this. I will just cd into the root, or maybe I can do it from here. I'll just add my changes. Now before we actually commit this, there is one more thing that we need to do, because we're going to deploy our application to a platform called render.com, and it wants you to create this file under the backend. We'll say vsgi.app. I'm sorry, not app, but that is going to be py. So this is going to be a Python file as well. And the content is just going to be to be able to run this app. So from app, import the app. And if we are running this directly, just run this app. So save this file, and let's head over to the app as well. Let's save this one. And now in the deployment environment, they are not going to have the packages that we need for this backend. So we have imported Flask, SQLAlchemy, Flask cores, and to be able to let the deployment environment get all of them, we need to create some kind of requirements file, which is going to be the package JSON, but for the backend. And to be able to get that, we're going to run one command. So let's cd into the backend, and we will say pip freeze and just put a greater than. and we'll say requirements.txt. So it should be just like this. And if you are on macOS or Linux, that should be pip3, right? So if we just press that, it should create that file. So these are all the packages that we are using under the hood. So when we deploy this, the deployment environment will take a look at this file and it's going to install all these so that they can run this file and get our application up and running. So I think these are everything that we need for this section. So let's go ahead and add all of our changes. We have added VSGI, which is something that I'll explain in a second. Then we have requirements.txt, and then we have served our static files. Okay, let's commit this. And this is my commit message. We just configured the app.py for deployment. And now we'd like to push this repo to the GitHub. So I'll just go ahead into my GitHub account and create a new repo. And I'll say React Python tutorial. And I'll make it private, but once I publish this video, that's going to be public. So if you want to go with public, just click to that. But for now, I'll go with private. Let's create the repo. Then I'm going to copy this command to be able to push my changes. So I'll say cd, go up into the root and paste it. So it looks like it just pushed it. Let's see, I'll refresh. And there we go, we have the backend, the front end, and it's just been updated 1 minute ago. And for that, we'll be using render, as I said previously. So just head over to the render.com, create an account for free, and it's going to take you to the dashboard. So this is an application that I have deployed previously. Just ignore that, but I'll go ahead and just say create a new web service, and we will build and deploy from a Git repo, which is going to be this repo that I just have, React Python tutorial, and I'll say connect. Now the branch that we will have is going to be master. In your case, that could be main, so just leave it like that. And we need to pass a start command as well as build command. Now we said that we're going to run this in the /API folder, so I'll just say API because this is where we have app.py. Let me just shrink this and like that. So the current working directory is going to be backend so that we can go one up and then cd into the front end. That's what I'll be doing. So the root directory is going to be, I'm sorry, not API, but it was backend, right? So this is the backend folder that we have at API. And the build command is going to be pip install -r requirements.txt. So it's going to install all of our dependencies that we need for the backend. And then we're gonna go cd one up into the front end, and then we'll say just npm install all dependencies for the front end for React application. And once you have done that, just say npm run build to be able to get that dist folder. And let me just zoom in a little bit. So pip install the requirements, then cd into the front end, install all dependencies for that, and build the application to be able to get the dist folder. And to be able to start this application, we will say use a green unicorn, and instead of app :app, we'll say vsgi and app. So that was the file that we would like to use to be able to start our application. And again, I'll just explain what is this gunicorn and vsgi in a second. Let's say go with the free tier, and the only downside is that this is gonna go to the inactive mode if you don't really visit your site more than maybe 15 minutes, which is fine for a side project like this. And with everything set it up, I think we can just deploy this. Let's just see. This is our branch. In your case, that could be main. Root directory is backend, and this is our build command. We have the start command, the free tier, and just say create web service. Now this is going to take a bit of time. Here it says building, and once it is done, I'll just come back to the video. So while it builds our application, I'll just go into the vsgi.py and put a comment for your convenience, which is about green unicorn and vsgi, which is known as web server gateway interface. So these are components that are used in deploying and serving Python web applications, and particularly those built with Flask and Django. In our case, we are using Flask, and with the help of this GUnicorn and VSGI, we were able to deploy our application. So you can take a look at it more by just doing a little bit of research, but just know that these are used to deploy and serve this Python application. Okay, with that, let's save this file and take a look at the end result. So it is live, and let's click to it. And there we go. This is the live site that we have. We can go into the light mode, dark mode, and let's create a user. So I'll just say John Doe and put a role. I'll just say front-end developer, and I'll say he is pretty advanced, and just add it. So there we go, it works. It's been added into our database. Even if we refresh, we're still gonna have that as an output. We can update it. Let's say John Doe maybe 2, and let's put something here at the very end, and I'll say update, and there we go, the name changed and the description. Let's create one more by going here. I'll say Jane Doe, and then just put a role. I'll say is this an SUE, and let's just say she knows her stuff, and select the gender and add it. There we go, it's been updated. We can delete one of them or maybe all of them, and it's going to update the UI accordingly. And let's just check if it is responsive or not. I'll just put something pretty quickly. So I just added 4 different users, and let's see if this is responsive or not. And there we go, everything is working up until this breakpoint. And we have a console.log. I think it is in the React application. If you want to, you could remove it. And with this, I think this is gonna be it for this tutorial where we built and deploy an entire application using Flask and React. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.